The holographic display flickered to life in the center of Professor Vex-9's tactical studies classroom, casting blue light across the eager faces of cadets from 17 different species. Well, 16 eager faces and one human who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Today, class, we examine the Battle of Kepler-442b, Professor Vex-9 announced, his three eyes gleaming with academic excitement. A textbook example of how superior numbers mean absolutely nothing when facing human military tactics. Several cadets groaned. Another human war story. The Zephyrian sitting next to the human, a purple-scaled female named Kira, rolled all four of her eyes simultaneously. Oh great, another humans are scary lecture. What's next? They're going to tell us humans can survive on nothing but caffeine and spite. The human cadet, who went by Marcus, snorted quietly. That's not entirely wrong, actually. Professor Vex-9's antennae twitched with annoyance. Perhaps Cadet Marcus would prefer to share his expertise with the class instead of providing commentary? No, sir. Please continue, Marcus replied, sinking lower in his seat. I'm sure this will be very educational. The hologram shifted, displaying a rocky planet with 3 moons hanging in a crimson sky. Kepler-442b. 5 years ago, the hegemony's 7th Fleet attempted to establish a foothold on this strategically vital world. What they encountered was a single human medical unit, apparently stranded after their transport was shot down. A tall, insectoid Threx cadet named Zix raised one of his 4 arms. Sir, wasn't this the battle where 300 hegemony shock troopers were defeated by 12 humans? 11, Marcus corrected automatically, then immediately looked like he regretted speaking. Professor Vex-9's middle eye focused on Marcus with laser intensity. 11? The official records clearly state 12 humans were present. Well, yeah, 12 were there initially, Marcus said, shifting uncomfortably. But 1 got vaporized by plasma fire in the first 30 seconds. Pretty hard to fight when you're a cloud of superheated atoms, you know? The classroom fell silent. Even the usually chatty Felinian twins, Whiskers and Patches, stopped their constant grooming to stare at Marcus. How exactly would you know such specific details, Cadet? Professor Vex-9 asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Marcus looked around the room at all the staring faces, sighed deeply, and shrugged, because I was the medic there. The silence stretched so long you could hear the space station's life support systems humming in the walls. Then Kira burst out laughing. Oh, that's rich. Next you'll tell us you personally strangled a hegemony commander with medical tubing. Actually, that was Corporal Jenny who did that, Marcus said matter-of-factly. I was too busy trying to keep Lieutenant Torres from bleeding out after he took a pulse rifle burst to the chest. Though I did use my medical scanner to blind a hegemony sniper. Turns out those things have really bright emergency strobes. Professor Vex-9's mandibles clicked nervously. Cadet Marcus, this is hardly the time for elaborate jokes. Computer, display personnel records for the 23rd Medical Corps. Kepler-442b engagement, Marcus interrupted, his voice suddenly tired. Authorization code Tango 77 Alpha. The hologram flickered and shifted, displaying military records. There, clear as starlight, was Marcus's photo alongside his service record. Medic First Class Marcus Rivera, 23rd Medical Corps, decorated veteran of 17 engagements, survivor of Kepler-442b. The collective intake of breath from 23 different respiratory systems created a sound like a deflating space tire. Sweet mother of quantum mechanics, whispered Patches, her orange fur standing on end. Professor Vex-9's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a sure sign of severe shock in his species. You're actually him. The medic from the Kepler-442b incident. Guilty as charged, Marcus said, looking supremely uncomfortable with the attention. Though incident is a pretty mild way to describe watching your friends get turned into cosmic dust while you're trying to patch up holes in people with whatever medical supplies that you can find. Cat-eyed, Zix's compound eyes were practically bulging out of his head, but the official report said it was impossible. 11 humans against 300 hegemony shock troopers. on hostile terrain, with minimal supplies. The tactical analysis concluded it should have been a massacre. It was a massacre, Marcus replied darkly, just not the one everybody expected. The hologram began playing the standard tactical recreation of the battle. Geometric shapes representing forces moved across the terrain while Professor Vex-9's voice provided narration. The hegemony forces landed here, establishing a perimeter around what they believed to be a crash site. Intelligence suggested minimal human survivors. Possibly wounded. Wounded? Yeah, Marcus interrupted with a bitter laugh. Taurus had a hole you could put your fist through, Singh was missing half his left arm, and Kowalski had taken enough shrapnel to set off metal detectors 3 systems away. But wounded doesn't mean helpless. The hologram showed the hegemony forces advancing in standard formation toward a cluster of rocky outcroppings. They came in textbook perfect, Marcus continued, his voice taking on a clinical tone. Disciplined ranks, proper spacing, overlapping fields of fire. It would have been beautiful if they weren't trying to kill us. Kira leaned forward, her earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. So what went wrong for them? Marcus smiled. And it wasn't a pleasant expression. They made a fundamental error in their assumptions. They assumed that because we were a medical unit, we'd surrender or run. They forgot that human medics are still human soldiers first. The holographic display showed the hegemony forces reaching the rocky area and beginning to search systematically. This is where it gets interesting, Professor Vex-9 said, his academic excitement warring with obvious nervousness. According to the records, the humans simply vanished. We didn't vanish, Marcus corrected. We did what humans do best when we're outnumbered and outgunned. We got creative and extremely vindictive. A crystalloid cadet named Prism raised her shimmering hand. The reports mention improvised explosive devices made from medical supplies. How is that even possible? Marcus turned to look at her, and his grin became positively predatory. Oh, that's the beautiful thing about human medicine. Half our equipment is designed to deliver precise chemical reactions to biological systems. The other half involves controlled electrical discharges. Put them together wrong, and boom, instant fireworks. You turned medical equipment into weapons? Zix asked, his voice climbing several octaves. Kid, a human medic's bag is basically a portable chemistry set with life support functions, Marcus explained. Oxygen canisters become fuel-air explosives. Defibrillator charges can overload electronic systems. Even something as simple as a surgical laser can cut through armor if you know what you're doing. The hologram showed explosions beginning to rock the hegemony formation. The first blast took out their command unit, Professor Vex-9 narrated, trying to maintain his academic composure. 17 soldiers eliminated instantly. 23, Marcus corrected again, as rigged that one personally. Guy was an artist with improvised ordnance. Even with a sucking chest wound, he could make a medical scanner explode with the force of a plasma grenade. The classroom was dead silent, except for the sound of various species trying to process this information. But that was just the opening move, Marcus continued, warming to his subject despite himself. See, the thing about being a medic is that you learn to think in terms of systems, biological systems, mechanical systems, tactical systems. Break the right component, and the whole thing falls apart. The hologram showed the hegemony forces regrouping, trying to establish new command structures. They thought they were dealing with a desperate medical unit making a last stand, Marcus said, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. What they were actually facing was 11 extremely angry humans who knew exactly how to cause maximum damage with minimum resources. Whiskers raised her paw tentatively. The reports mentioned something about psychological warfare. Marcus's grin became absolutely feral. Oh yeah, that was my contribution. See, hegemony physiology is fascinating from a medical perspective. Their nervous systems are incredibly sensitive to certain frequencies. Turns out, a modified medical scanner can broadcast at exactly the right wavelength to cause severe disorientation in their species. You weaponized their biology against them? Kira asked, her voice a mixture of horror and admiration. I saved lives. Marcus replied firmly. Confused enemies don't shoot straight. Disoriented soldiers make mistakes. And mistakes, in combat, are often fatal. The holographic battle continued to unfold, showing the hegemony forces becoming increasingly scattered and panicked. This is where the engagement becomes truly extraordinary, Professor Vex-9 said, his voice barely above a whisper. The remaining humans began systematically hunting the hegemony forces. Hunting makes it sound predatory, Marcus objected. We were conducting aggressive medical interventions on enemy personnel. Several cadets looked confused. You were treating the enemy? Prism asked. In a manner of speaking, Marcus replied, his voice taking on an innocent tone that fooled absolutely no one. We were rapidly transitioning them from a state of being alive to a state of being extremely dead. From a medical perspective, that's definitely a change in condition. The silence that followed this statement was so complete that the station's artificial gravity seemed to hum louder. That, Zix said finally, is the most terrifying thing I've ever heard said in such a calm voice. Thank you, Marcus replied cheerfully. I've been practicing. The hologram showed the final phase of the battle, with the surviving hegemony forces attempting a desperate retreat. According to these records, Professor Vex-9 said, consulting his datapad with shaking hands, only 37 hegemony soldiers survived the engagement, out of 300. 36, Marcus corrected once more. One of them died from his wounds during evacuation, massive internal trauma. I could have saved him, probably, but at that point we were fresh out of sympathy. The classroom erupted in a mixture of horrified gasps and nervous laughter. But, wait, Kira said, holding up one scaled hand. If you were there, if this all really happened, what are you doing here? In a classroom, learning about battles you already fought. Marcus's expression became serious for the first time since the conversation started, because Command decided that someone who could turn a first aid kit into a weapon of mass destruction might benefit from learning some actual military theory. Apparently, I made it work isn't considered adequate tactical documentation. Plus, he added with a slight smile, they thought it might be educational for other species to learn alongside humans. Cultural exchange and all that. Professor Vex-9's antennae were twitching so rapidly they were almost blurring. Cadet Marcus, perhaps you could provide some insight into the tactical decisions made during the engagement. Sure, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. First rule of human combat medicine: keep your patients alive long enough to let them kill the enemy. Second rule: if the enemy is trying to kill your patients, the enemy becomes a medical problem that requires immediate treatment. Treatment? Patches asked weakly. Terminal treatment, Marcus clarified helpfully. The hologram continued its display, showing the aftermath of the battle. Smoking craters dotted the landscape where once proud hegemony formations had stood. The official analysis of this engagement has been studied by military academies across 17 systems, Professor Vex-9 said, trying to regain control of his lecture. It's considered a masterwork of asymmetrical warfare tactics. It was Tuesday, Marcus said flatly. A really bad Tuesday. The stunned silence in the classroom was broken by the soft chime of the station's meal period announcement. Nobody moved. End day. So, Whiskers said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. What happened next? Marcus glanced at Professor Vex-9, who nodded weakly. The hologram flickered and advanced to show the final hours of the engagement. Well, at this point we had a problem, Marcus continued, his tone conversational despite describing what was clearly a nightmare scenario. We'd successfully eliminated most of the immediate threat, but Torres was getting worse, and our medical supplies were running dangerously low. Running low because you'd turned them into explosives, Zix pointed out. Exactly. See, this is why I'm here learning proper resource management, Marcus replied with mock enthusiasm. Apparently there's supposed to be a balance between keeping people alive and making things explode. Who knew? Kira leaned forward, her purple scales shimmering under the classroom lights. But you still had enemy forces in the area. How did you handle evacuation with wounded personnel? Marcus's expression grew darker. That's where things got really interesting. The hegemony commander, A real piece of work named General Thax 907 decided to make this personal. The hologram shifted to show a heavily armored hegemony officer with ceremonial markings, standing amid the wreckage of his forces. Thax 907 was old-school hegemony military, Professor Vex-9 explained, consulting his notes. Decorated veteran of 12 successful campaigns, he'd never faced humans before. Yeah, that became pretty obvious pretty quickly, Marcus said dryly. Guy decides to broadcast a surrender demand on all frequencies. Real dramatic stuff about honorable defeat and prisoner treatment according to galactic conventions. And you responded how? Prism asked, though her crystalline features suggested she was already dreading the answer. Marcus's grin returned full force. Jenny grabbed the comm unit and told him exactly where he could stick his surrender demand, in anatomically explicit detail. Across 7 different languages, several cadets made choking sounds. But here's the beautiful part. Marcus continued, clearly enjoying himself now. While Jenny was providing the general with an expanded vocabulary lesson, I was using my medical tricorder to hack into their communications network. Professor Vex-9's mandibles clicked rapidly. That's not possible. Medical equipment doesn't have that capability. Standard medical equipment doesn't, Marcus agreed. But when you modify the quantum resonance chambers and reroute the biometric sensors through the emergency beacon transmitter, you can basically turn a medical scanner into a really sophisticated electronic warfare device. The room erupted in horrified muttering from multiple species. You turned medical equipment into a hacking tool, Patches squeaked. Kid, human medical technology is designed to interface with the most complex biological computer in known space, the human brain, Marcus explained patiently. Compared to that, cracking hegemony military encryption is like performing surgery with a chainsaw. Messy, but effective. The hologram showed communications disruptions spreading through the remaining hegemony forces. Within 20 minutes, I had complete access to their tactical network, Marcus continued. Communications, targeting systems, even their environmental controls. Turns out, hegemony battle armor has a really interesting vulnerability. Which is? Zix asked, though he sounded like he really didn't want to know. Their life support systems are networked for efficiency, Marcus explained, his voice taking on the tone of a professor explaining basic concepts. Makes sense from an engineering perspective. Centralized monitoring, automated adjustments, real-time health updates sent to command. Oh no, Kira whispered, her 4 eyes widening in horror. Oh yes, Marcus confirmed cheerfully. I convinced their armor that they were all suffering from severe atmospheric poisoning. The suits immediately began emergency life support protocols. What kind of protocols? Whiskers asked weakly. Well, first the armor floods their systems with stimulants to counteract perceived toxins, Marcus explained. Then it begins rapid oxygen cycling to purge contaminated air. Finally, it activates emergency beacon protocols to call for immediate medical evacuation. The hologram showed hegemony soldiers suddenly convulsing in their armor, stumbling around in confusion as their own life support systems went haywire. You gave an entire military unit panic attacks using their own equipment? Prism asked in disbelief. I provided them with an enhanced cardiovascular workout while simultaneously improving their communication skills, Marcus replied innocently. They became much more talkative once their armor started telling them they were dying. This is insane, Zix muttered, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic display. You turned their own technology against them. That's the thing about humans, Marcus said, his voice becoming more serious. We don't just adapt to technology, we make it adapt to us. And when someone tries to use superior tech to kill our friends, well, we take that personally. The classroom display showed General Thax 907 attempting to regain control of his panicking forces. According to these records, Professor Vex-9 said, his voice shaking slightly. This is when the general made his fatal mistake. Yep, Marcus nodded. He decided to handle the situation personally, grabbed a squad of his best troops and came hunting for us. That seems tactically sound, Kira observed. Elite forces. Personal command. Focused objective, it would have been. Marcus agreed. If he'd been hunting normal soldiers. But he wasn't. He was hunting angry medics with nothing left to lose and a really unhealthy understanding of biological systems. The hologram zoomed in on a rocky canyon where the final confrontation took place. This is where Lieutenant Torres made his last stand, Professor Vex-9 narrated solemnly. Torres was amazing, Marcus said, his voice losing its earlier humor. Guy was basically held together with medical tape and pure spite at that point, but he insisted on rigging one final surprise for our visitors. What kind of surprise? Patches asked nervously. Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring at the holographic display. When he spoke again, his voice was soft but carried an edge that made several cadets shift uncomfortably. Torres had been a demolitions expert before cross-training into medical. He took every piece of medical equipment we had left, every chemical compound, every power cell, and built something that shouldn't have been possible. The hologram showed a complex device assembled from clearly medical components. A medical bomb? Zix asked incredulously. A medical miracle, Marcus corrected. See, most explosives are designed to cause maximum damage over a wide area. What Torres built was different. It was designed to incapacitate rather than kill, using precisely calculated chemical dispersal and electromagnetic pulse generation. He built a non-lethal weapon from medical supplies? Kira asked. Oh, it was plenty lethal, Marcus replied, just not immediately. See, the device released a cocktail of compounds that would interact with hegemony physiology in very specific ways. Memory disruption, motor function impairment, severe disorientation. Basically, it turned elite soldiers into confused, helpless patients. The holographic display showed the device detonating as General Thax 907 and his squad entered the canyon, and then, Whiskers prompted. Marcus's expression became absolutely cold. Then we provided medical assistance. The silence stretched until Professor Vex-9 cleared his throat nervously. The official records indicate that General Thax 907 and his squad were found 3 days later by hegemony rescue forces. Found alive, Marcus clarified. Completely intact, not a scratch on them. But? Prism asked, sensing there was more to the story. But they had no memory of the previous 72 hours. Marcus continued. No idea how they'd gotten to that canyon, no recollection of the battle, nothing. Just 3 days of blank space in their minds. The cadets exchanged nervous glances. However, Marcus said, his grin returning, they did have some interesting new medical conditions. Nothing life-threatening, you understand, just educational. What kind of educational? Zix asked, though his tone suggested he was already regretting the question. Well, the general developed a fascinating neurological quirk, Marcus explained cheerfully. Every time he tried to give a military order, he would instead recite human nursery rhymes, complete with hand gestures. Several cadets made strangled noises. His lieutenant developed an uncontrollable urge to perform therapeutic dance movements whenever he heard loud noises, Marcus continued. Really improved morale in the hegemony medical corps. I'm told, you gave enemy soldiers comedy routines? Kira asked weakly. Yes, I provided them with enhanced emotional expression capabilities and improved stress response mechanisms, Marcus replied with mock professionalism. The fact that these manifested as involuntary entertainment was purely coincidental. Professor Vex-9 was frantically checking his datapad. These effects, they were permanent? Oh, completely reversible, Marcus assured him. The compounds metabolize out of their systems within 6 months. Though I understand the general's military career never quite recovered from the nursery rhyme incident. The hologram showed the final statistics of the engagement. 300 hegemony soldiers deployed, 36 survivors. 11 humans, 0 human casualties beyond the initial transport incident. This engagement fundamentally changed how the hegemony approaches human conflicts, Professor Vex-9 said, trying to regain his academic composure. They now classify human medical personnel as weapons of mass destruction, which brings us to why I'm here, Marcus said. Gesturing around the classroom, Command decided that someone with my particular skill set might benefit from learning conventional military tactics. You know, methods that don't involve turning life-saving equipment into instruments of psychological warfare. Are you learning? Whiskers asked hesitantly. Marcus considered this seriously. Well, I've discovered that most of you have really interesting physiological responses to stress. Did you know that Threx cadet antenna twitching follows a predictable pattern that could be used to gauge emotional states? Or that Felinian pupils dilate in exact proportion to their level of anxiety? The mentioned cadets immediately tried to hide their respective reactions. That's not conventional military tactics, Kira pointed out. No, but it's useful information, Marcus replied. After all, understanding your allies is just as important as understanding your enemies. Maybe more important. Professor Vex-9 set down his data pad with shaking hands. Class, I think we've learned quite enough for one day. Tomorrow we'll be covering the Siege of Proxima Station, a much more conventional engagement. Oh, I was there for that one too, Marcus said helpfully. Different unit, though. Combat engineers that time. The collective groan from 23 different species created a sound like a small atmospheric disturbance. Let me guess, Zix said weakly. You turned construction equipment into weapons? Actually, we turned weapons into construction equipment, Marcus replied, much more challenging from an engineering perspective. Did you know you can use plasma cannons to weld bulkhead supports if you adjust the frequency correctly? As the cadets filed out of the classroom in various states of shock and horrified fascination, Marcus remained seated, reviewing his notes from the lecture. Kira paused at his desk. Marcus, yeah, promise me something, she said seriously. If we ever end up fighting on the same side, warn me before you start getting creative. Marcus looked up at her with genuine surprise. Kira, we're allies. I'd never do anything to hurt you or any of the others. That's not what I'm worried about, she replied. I'm worried that watching you work might give me nightmares. Fair point, Marcus conceded. But hey, look on the bright side, which is. Marcus's grin became absolutely terrifying. If we're ever fighting together, it means someone else is about to have a really, really bad day. As Kira left the classroom, she could be heard muttering in her native language. Professor Vex-9, who was fluent in 17 different tongues, went pale as he translated her words. She was praying to her ancestors that she would never, ever see Marcus angry. Meanwhile, Marcus continued reviewing his notes, occasionally chuckling at passages about proper resource allocation and appropriate use of medical equipment. Tomorrow's lesson on conventional siege tactics was going to be very interesting indeed.